Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to introduce the Acting Secretary of the Navy, the Honorable Thomas Modly.
Thanks so much for the introduction, and thanks for being here. I'm going to be interrupting your dinner here for a little bit, so I apologize for that. But it's just such a great honor to be able to pull this together. And I do want to, before we start, I do want to thank the Deputy Undersecretary of the Navy, Jody Green. Where's Jody? Jody! There she is. So Jody and I have been talking about this event for about a year and a half, right, Jody? And I said, yeah, let's go do it out on a ship. Like, let's do this out on a ship. You know, let's find a ship that's being commanded by a woman, and let's get out there. And she's like, sir, can you just let me handle this? And I was like, and I'm glad I did, because she found a great venue for this. So just very grateful for all of our panelists who are here. It's a great honor to have them here. And some of you may know this, but I grew up in a home with four sisters and no brothers. And my parents were both European immigrants, so it was International Women's Day every day in my house. And every time I gripe about that, my wife says, you know, Tom, you know, that's what makes you such a spectacularly fantastic husband. She's never said that, really. But she should. At any rate, I just wanted to relay a story to you. I was at a memorial service last week in Colorado Springs for a 97-year-old veteran from World War II. And he was one of the last three survivors from the USS Arizona. And his story is unbelievable, and I won't go through the whole story. But I'd never met him before. I had heard about him, I'd heard the stories about him. And when I got up to do they asked me to speak there, and I said, you know, I'd never met Don Stratton before, but I'd seen him. Because I'd seen him in the eyes of the hundreds of veterans that I had met from World War II over the last several years. And their eyes tell a story. And there's a wisdom there, and when you talk to them, they relay it to you, but you know you get the sense that they know that you're never truly going to understand everything about it. But when they look at each other, that's when you know that there's something going on that you're not a part of. And so the women we saw in the video before, the sailors and the Marines, I've never met any of them, but I've seen them. Because I've seen him in the eyes of the women that I've served with in the military and the women that I've served with in government. There are stories behind every single one of those about how difficult it's been to achieve what they've achieved. And there's a wisdom there too, and they need to share it because it's hard for us to understand sometimes. I was at the Naval Academy from 1979 to 1983. My set of firsties were the first women to be admitted into the Naval Academy. And I was just reading about that class. I think they had about 80-some women that came into that class, and only 50 of them made it. And I think those women, the women that I graduated with, are probably some of the bravest people I've ever met because of what they had to go through to get to where they got. And now I'm a father of 3 daughters, which also makes me a spectacular husband. And a granddaughter. My first grandchild is a girl. And I just want to thank every woman here, because the opportunities that you opened up for them, and particularly for this grandchild of mine, are because of the stories that are in your eyes and what you did. So it's amazing. And we've got a long way to go, but I was on the USS Ford about 2 weeks ago, and I went into the engine room of the USS Ford, which is the most, as we all know, we've been hearing a lot about, the most sophisticated nuclear power plant in the world. And when I was in the Navy, women weren't even allowed on the ship. And when I walked down to that ship 2 weeks ago, there was a woman commander running that nuclear power plant. So don't be discouraged. It takes time, but we're making tremendous progress. So thank you so much for being here. And we really look forward to listening to our panelists and have them share the stories we need to understand, because we can't be part of the process of making this better over time unless we're part of it. So thank you very much for being here, and enjoy your meal. Thanks.
Sir, thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming, once again, our panelists and our moderator for this evening's panel, Perspectives on Women's Contributions to Security and Prosperity. I think they're coming.
Hello. Well, thank you all. I'm so honored to be a part of this night tonight. I feel like I don't need this because my voice kind of projects anyway. But my name is Courtney Kuby. I'm the Pentagon and National Security correspondent for NBC News. I know a lot of people here. And we have such an unbelievable panel here this evening. So we're going to start off by everyone's going to give a little introduction of themselves, and then we'll go to a couple of questions. Everyone, please enjoy your dinner while we speak. I'll start with myself. I don't want to waste too much time on myself because we have these other women up here, but I'm about to celebrate 20 years at NBC News in June. I know, it's crazy, huh? Most people move on to other networks, but I've stayed at the same place. As I said, I've been there 20 years. I spent the majority of that time covering the Pentagon, but I actually started off in journalism as a bit of a fluke. I fell into it backwards. I was in college studying to be a doctor. And I was broke one summer, and I came home to Maryland to live with my parents and bartend. And I interviewed for a bunch of different internships, and the only place that offered me one was Meet the Press with Tim Russert. And in fairness, the only reason they offered it to me was because I could stay through Labor Day, and the other kids couldn't. So that was my qualification. But it stuck. I loved NBC. I loved journalism. I loved the pace and the deadlines and the pressure and even the tedium that is NBC and that is journalism, television journalism especially. So after college, Tim hired me on, and I spent about 5 years working at Meet the Press. And after the 2004 election, I went to him and said, I don't think I can cover politics anymore because I've grown to absolutely hate it. And he said, well, if you want something that's a little bit less vicious than DC politics, how do you feel about covering war? And I said, I'll give it a shot. And I did. And a couple weeks later, I was at the Pentagon, and just a few short months later, I was in Iraq and Baghdad and then Afghanistan. And 15 years later, I'm still there. The landscape has changed a tremendous amount in that time. A few weeks after I started at the Pentagon, I found myself sitting in a Marine Corps roundtable, a press event at the Pentagon. Everyone was speaking in acronyms, and I didn't even know what the topic was. About 15 minutes in, I couldn't understand what was going on, and I looked around the room for a friendly face, and I counted 24 people in there, and I was the only woman. And at the time, there was actually only one other woman in the press corps, in the resident Pentagon press corps, besides myself. But times have changed a lot since then. I actually look at the challenges of those early days as a real blessing, because I was forced to fight. I was forced to realize I had to work very hard to be seen as an equal. I read everything I could, I studied, I worked longer hours, and I taught myself that I was going to have to earn it if I wanted to be seen as an equal among the people in this press corps. Many of them had been covering the Pentagon longer than I'd been alive at this point. I was 25 years old. That I was going to have to just work harder, and I was going to have to earn their respect, and I feel like I did over time. And it's helped me that I'm no longer intimidated and I feel like an equal. And the press corps has really changed as well. We're now nearly 50% women. Many of them are younger. The media landscape has changed a lot as well. So I look at that time as a real blessing. The other thing that I've learned over time is that it is so critical to have women covering national security events, and specifically covering conflict and war. Women bring a compassion to covering war that is so important for the American people to see. I think that it's extremely important for the American people to know what it's like for the men and women who are deployed to dangerous areas, to know what it's like for their everyday lives. It's not always pleasant and it's not always comfortable, and most Americans will never know what it's like. But we have the honor and the privilege to be able to show it to them. And as a woman, especially after I became a mom, I looked at it very differently. It was harder after having kids. It was a lot harder to cover conflict. It became much more emotional, much more personal. But I hope that that is something that the viewers can benefit from, that they can see things through my eyes in a more personal way, and that they can really understand the hardships of what the men and women are going through, and that they then can ask the same questions that we ask, which is, do these people need to be deployed to difficult areas? And I also want to say that, you know, as a journalist, I go over there for much shorter periods of time than you men and women do in uniform. So I only see a snapshot of it. But I hope that being a woman and being a mom, I bring a different element of emotion and maybe a little bit more personalization of the war to the viewers. I want to give our other panelists an opportunity to speak. One of the big issues, though, I'm really hoping that we can get to here from everyone is a couple of issues. One is mentorship. You know, I mentioned Tim Russert. I studied, of course, when I started. I read books like The Idiot's Guide to Special Operations Command. I read it, I still have it at home. It's not actually that helpful, candidly. But one of the big things that really, and one of the main people who I can credit for my sitting here tonight and for being at the Pentagon and being the correspondent for NBC News is Jim Miklaszewski. When I started in 2005, he was our Pentagon correspondent, and he took me under his wing. And he didn't have to. I was 25. I was a kid. I didn't know what I was doing. And he took me to meetings, and he treated me as a colleague and as an equal. Tim Russert is another one. They both gave me so many opportunities. And it's something that has taught me, it was an important lesson for me to learn. And I hope, and I desperately try, that when younger men and women, but really women, in national security coverage, when they come to me and they need advice and they want help, and especially when you're so busy and you don't have time to sit down and have coffee and talk to them, if I can encourage anything here tonight, I hope that you know that every time I do that, even when I don't really feel like doing it, the passion in their eyes and their desire to learn, it's the same one that I had when I was 25. And it is so important for us to encourage that in men and women, but I hope people will take a little effort and encourage that in women. So that's one thing I'm hoping that we can talk about here as well, is what are some of the ways that, if you could tell some of your personal reflections on how you got to this point in your careers, and what opportunities and challenges that you faced as you made your way here. Senator?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, everyone. I'm Senator Joni Ernst from the great state of Iowa. Do we have any Iowans here? Yay, let's hear for Iowa. Okay. Thank you. My own personal journey really started growing up on a farm in southwest Iowa. So it is a traditional family working farm. And it was my mom, my dad, and my older sister and I, and then a few years later along came my brother. But my parents really taught me that hard work is valuable, hard work is important, working with our hands. You know, we all had chores to do. So just understanding that work ethic. And because of those opportunities I was given on our family farm, I had the great and valuable experience of going to an agricultural exchange while I was at Iowa State University in between my semesters, of going to Ukraine. And that was while it was part of the Soviet Union. And I stayed on a collective farm with a number of other Iowa students, each of us in a different household, and we worked out on the farm. And what struck me was that in 1989 Ukraine, they were still farming with horses and wagons. They had no running water. They had no refrigeration in their homes. They had no telephone. Very, very rural, and what I would think of Iowa as maybe the 20s and 30s, 1920s and 30s. So we would get together in the evening on that collective, and the Ukrainians would have the opportunity to ask us questions. And remember, it's an agricultural exchange. But the first question that group asked us, the adults from the collective, the very first question was, what is it like to be an American? What is it like to be free? And that whole episode just changed my outlook. And I've always been a proud American, but it was kind of then that I resolved I couldn't just continue to be a proud American. I really needed to do something to preserve and protect my own country. And so when I returned to Iowa State University, then I enrolled in the Army ROTC program. I eventually went on to be commissioned as a second lieutenant in the Army Engineers. When I went to my officer basic course, I was one of 12 females in a class of 180. At that time, you could be either a combat heavy engineer, which is construction, which was okay because I had operated heavy equipment with my dad and his construction and farming operation. That was great. But the men could be either combat heavy engineers or combat engineers. They could go on to sapper school. The 12 of us didn't have that opportunity. And it wasn't because of our talents, our skills, and our abilities. It was because of our gender. So I was cut out of a career that I believe I would have loved because of my gender. And I look at today, now after serving a 23-year career between the Army Reserves and the Iowa Army National Guard, I look at the opportunities that women are given. And it was 2016 when all of those fields were opened up to women. And I'm so excited that we do have female engineers, combat engineers that are out there. We have women infantrymen that are serving, and I'm so very proud of that. My daughter, who I thought would be maybe resentful of the time that I spent away at drill and all of those other, annual training, I was deployed for a year when she was 3 years old. I thought she would be so resentful of those opportunities, but what she saw, when you talk about mentorship, what she saw was a strong mother who was the first female company commander of her transportation unit. I had to transfer because all the Iowa Guard had was combat engineers. Another story for another day. But transferred into transportation, deployed for a year, led convoys in Kuwait and Iraq, and I thought she would be resentful of all that. But what she saw was a strong mother who cared enough to serve her country and be a mom. And she's a second-year student now at West Point. So I am thrilled that she has that opportunity now. If she chooses to be in the infantry, if she meets the standards and qualifications, by God, she can be in the infantry. And I am so thrilled that we now present those opportunities to our young women. So I'll leave it there. I know we've got a lot of stories yet to go, but just very honored to have served and proud to be able to serve in another capacity now. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. I'm really thrilled and honored to be here today. I appreciate very much the invitation of Secretary Motley and Undersecretary Green to be here. I'm the ambassador of Mexico, and I'm the first female ambassador of Mexico in more than 200 years of relationships with the U.S. We have had 3 foreign ministers, but not even one female ambassador to the U.S. So that shows you that we are still a very machista society in many ways. I could tell you a lot of personal stories on the foreign ministry, being married to a career diplomat who has just retired. But I had to sacrifice many years of my career to follow him because the Foreign Service would not allow us to serve both of us at the same time for the most simple reasons. Why are you going to earn two salaries? Because we are two workers, as simple as that. But that was not thought about. But what I'm really more proud of what I have done in my career for tonight is the work that I have done at the Foreign Ministry in areas related specifically on the participation of women in international peace and security. For many years, Mexico did not participate in peacekeeping operations. Just after the UN was established, Mexico participated in one of the peacekeeping operations, basically on the observation mission in Kashmir. But then for many years we did not participate. And I was working at the Foreign Ministry when I was asked to do a special study on if Mexico should participate or not in peacekeeping operations, because Mexico was joining the Security Council after many years also of not participating in the Security Council. So I went to do this study, and first I wrote a piece that is called the reconceptualization of security. So how even the concept of security has evolved and changed during time from a very military concept to a more multidimensional concept of security that includes terms as food security, as human security, as human development, and this. So what were the implications of this change of the concept of security? There were some of them very good implications, but some of them also very risky ones, because that would mean that either intervention from the United Nations or from a powerful country as the US in other countries based on violations on security could be very risky, particularly when this was linked to the concept of the responsibility to protect. So in that context, it was that the discussion in Mexico was framed. Should Mexico participate or not in peacekeeping operations, taking into account how the concept of security has evolved, and also how the peacekeeping operations had evolved too, from peacekeeping operations that were really stabilizing and putting an element of stability between two warring parties, to a peacekeeping operations that were much more interventionist, and that they were involved more in nation building. So should we or should not participate? So I did the first study at the Foreign Ministry recommending that Mexico should participate. And it took us some years of interaction with the Secretaría de Marina, with the Secretariat of Navy in Mexico, and with the Secretariat of Defense, la Secretaría de la Defensa. You know, we have two different secretariats in Mexico, to go and talk to the heads of the secretariat and to the people to tell them we are going back, we want to go back to peacekeeping operations. We worked very hard with Jean-Marie Guéno, with the different undersecretaries of United Nations. So I started teaching at the Naval Academy and the Defense College peacekeeping operations. And I directed 2 or 3 theses about what should be the rules of engagement of the Mexican Army and the Mexican Navy in peacekeeping operations. So I was very much involved in that. I left then the country, and some years later, Mexico announced that we were going to participate again in peacekeeping operations. And we have been participating with the Navy and with the Army in peacekeeping operations. And now there is even a rule or some guidelines that said that 40% of the Mexican participants in peacekeeping operations from Navy or defense have to be women. And that is really very important. So I feel very proud of all the work that I did at the Foreign Ministry to get Mexico to go back to participate in peacekeeping operations and to get women involved and that perspective of women involved in peacekeeping operations. The other very important matters that I have been personally involved and that have been key for me is the Mexican position on Resolution 1325, adopted by the UN Security Council, which is women in conflicts and women in peace processes. Because the more you study why conflicts are triggered and how conflicts are resolved, then you see that there is a direct correlation between women's participation in society and conflict. The less women participate in society, the more possibilities of conflict. And when you have women involved in mediation processes and in the peacekeeping processes, then you normally have a largest rate of success than when women are not involved. So we have been very active in that, and Mexico is now presented its candidacy to be elected again to the UN Security Council, and we hope to win this election because we're the only Latin American candidate for that. So that's good. So we are going back to the UN Security Council, and we have, as part of our candidacy, we have pledged to push forward the entire women, peace, and security agenda as one of the priorities of Mexico during the stay in the UN Security Council. But I have witnessed also the other parts of conflicts, which is not directly peacekeeping operations and this, but what you do when you have humanitarian crisis. I was ambassador to FAO, to the World Food Program, and to IFAD before coming here. So I had the opportunity to travel basically, and I was ambassador to Turkey. So I traveled to the different refugee camps in Turkey after the Syrian civil war exploded. I saw the work of WFP, World Food Program, on place in Turkey, in Nepal, in Bangladesh, this. And then you see that whatever the UN agencies do, if they work with women, they are normally more successful. And so how do we work with these agencies? First, to really involve women, but not only saying, in this program we included 40 women or 50 women, but to have a qualitative change and then ask what this involvement of women in these projects, specific projects, how did these projects empower women in the decision-taking process? So you don't only measure numbers, but how can you measure direct impact in the involvement of women in the decision-taking processes? And the other big issue when you have these huge UN operations deployed for humanitarian reasons is how do you avoid sexual harassment and abuse of power? And this because the more vulnerable the people, the more subject to sexual harassment and to abuse and to gender abuse, particularly with women children. So how do you educate people so that, for example, when you have World Food Program that distributes food or the cash-based transfers to guarantee that they have access to jobs and food, how do you guarantee that the people that are on the field are not abusing their power, particularly against women and girls? So these are areas in which I feel very much involved. And as ambassador of Mexico to the US, on the migration issues, I can tell you that maybe 60% or 70% of the protection cases that we have in the US, protecting our migrants, being them irregular or undocumented, are related to gender abuse and domestic violence. Either abuse sometimes by Border Patrol agents, or abuse at home, or abuse at shelters. And this is a phenomena that we see in a lot of cases, not only Mexico, but a lot of countries that when they have to protect their citizens, particularly women citizens, domestic violence and abuse is one of the areas in which we have to act. And sometimes it's very difficult to detect that. So we have we call them windows. We have an education window and financial inclusion window, but we have a window at the 50 consulates in the US that is called Integral Attention to Women. And we train our consuls to detect when there is a domestic abuse at home so that we can protect the people. It's not easy. I can tell you it's very difficult, but this is one of the priorities. So just to summarize, I feel very much thrilled to be here and to share with you, first, Mexico's participation in peacekeeping operation with women, Mexico's participation in United Nations Security Council, just pushing the agenda of women in peace and security, all our consular work in the US on protecting women against domestic violence and abuse, and all the work that I have done with passion, really, with the UN work to protect also women and to guarantee that women are an integral part of all UN missions, peacekeeping, humanitarian crisis, development cooperation, and that all this work really empowers women, not only counting how many women we have now, but really empowering women in the decision-taking process. So I'm a happy woman for that, let's say, although I know there is still a long way to go. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Ambassador. And you've really illustrated one of the major themes of this celebration tonight, and that is that the more that societies empower women politically and economically, the more stable and peaceful those nations are. That's one of the big themes of this evening. So, Ms. Stewart?
My only regret of the night is I'm going to have to go after Her Excellency. Secretary Moodley, thank you so much for inviting me part of the panel. And Jody, I said this to you privately, but I think it's worth repeating in this group setting. Jody took the time yesterday to walk me through the event and the care and thought that went behind the selection of the attendance tonight. You brought in multiple communities from different positional areas of life to make sure that we had a thoughtful discussion about how to really empower, mentor, and nurture our relationships, both with our female colleagues and our male colleagues. And I just want to especially thank you for the work that you and your team did. So thank you for that. I was thinking on the ride over, I had a colleague from the Secretary. I should back up. I'm Jennifer Stewart. I go by Jen. I am Secretary Esper's Chief of Staff. And I was privileged tonight to have a team member from our front office ride with me over to the event. And I was really thinking about what is it that I want to say about my professional journey that may be of merit or value to our audience tonight. So the very long story is I moved to DC without a job in 2001, and 2 days after I moved into my apartment, the FBI moved me out of my apartment. It was 9/11. I was in Crystal City. I was in an apartment high-rise, and it had line of sight of Reagan National Airport. So I was homeless and unemployed in the city on 9/11, and for someone who grew up in the Midwest, whose family never really understood what I'm doing out here, it was definitely a defining moment of my life. My first day on the job, opening mail in Speaker John Boehner's office, was the day that anthrax hit the Hill. So I worked one day, and then I was unemployed for 7 more weeks. And he'd call me every day and say, "We haven't run you off yet, have we?" And that was also when the DC sniper was going around. So I went home to my family, all of whom remain in Ohio, and they said, "You've never caused us an ounce of trouble your entire life, and in 3 months, you've given us a heart attack almost every day." So fast forward, what I would share with you is I've had an amazing professional journey, and a lot of it is due to the mentorship of some amazing bosses. And I think that's important to highlight, but I actually have had a different journey than a lot of women in this room. I started working in a congressional office for a member who saw value in me at a very young age, who over the objections of senior staff pulled me with him when he went to leadership, gave me the national security portfolio and told me to run and run hard and don't look back. I was also surrounded by senior staff of women who didn't see each other as competition, who didn't see a quota, and nurtured and empowered both at their level and then mentored down and mentored up. And so when I went through a different transition, it was actually startling. I came out of that professional bubble, and it made me realize that it's important, and I told Jody I was going to say this point tonight if I said nothing else. As women working with women and as women working with our male colleagues, it's just important to remember we don't need to treat women participating in any of these areas in this sphere as there's a quota and that we're in competition with each other. We really need to empower people to pursue their own unique paths to help them. Lots of questions about work-life balance, trying to fit in educational opportunities, other opportunities we want to explore. And I just wanted to make that point. The second thing I wanted to share is I went through a transition period where I had 4 amazing bosses in 4 months. They were all committed to taking care of me during my transition period. But one of the things that does to you is it makes you incredibly insecure about yourself and, if you're going to be able to pay your rent the next month. And there were quite a few female colleagues in a room talking about how we were going to manage our transition. And we had the one male colleague from the policy shop come in, and Secretary Moodley, it resonated with me. He said, I grew up, with 4 sisters, no brothers. He was very comfortable in that environment. A man walking into a room of women fretting, not for the faint of heart. And he said, listen up. If there's a job opening, a man is going to look at the job opening, and if there's 14 criteria, if there's 3 criteria on that list he thinks he can do, he's going to go for it with confidence he's going to get it. A woman's going to look at that and say, if I can't already excel with excellence, all 14 of those, they're not even going to interview me. He said, you're all amazing human beings, you're all professional, you're all qualified. You need to stop apologizing for who you are and go for it. And I share that story because anytime I do an informational interview with anyone, or anytime I've had an opportunity now that I have management experiences, to have younger females working for me, I make a point of sharing that story when they get to the point of talking to me about what they want to do next. So you can all read my bio, but there are some hidden lessons that I've learned as a female through that process that I thought would be helpful to highlight tonight. Thank you very much.
And Courtney, my apologies to the captain and to all of you as well. I have a flight leaving DCA in less than an hour, so I am going to punch out. But I do want to take the opportunity and thank you very much for the great evening and to be able to listen to some really tremendous women and that are leaders in the national security space. And God bless you all. Thank you all very much for all that you do. My regrets. Thank you so much.
Captain?
Okay, I am Captain Jennifer Kuchar. I am a surface warfare officer in the Navy, and I've just left command of Destroyer Squadron 28. And that's a lot of words. and many of you are probably going, what in the heck does that mean? That means that over the last almost 25 years, I have spent half of my career serving on ships at sea. And as I've just left my destroyer squadron, I had a squadron of 6 to 9 ships, DDGs, destroyers, really the Corvette of our fleet, that I was privileged to have the honor to serve as their commander of that squadron and serve my sailors. And so, again, as Ms. Stewart said, you can read my bio, but I want to show you a few things that are in there that may not be obvious to you in the year 2020. That in 1991, when I graduated from high school in the Garden part of the Garden State of New Jersey, I did not know anybody in the Navy. I had never seen a Navy ship. I didn't know what the Navy did. But I had visited the Naval Academy as a Girl Scout, and I met midshipmen And I thought, oh my gosh, that's what I want to be when I grow up. I want to be smart. I want to be physically fit. I want to be confident. I want to serve my country. And so, sight unseen, I accepted my ROTC scholarship and I headed down the street to the George Washington University because I had high hopes that someday, after I had served in the Navy, I might again serve my country as an ambassador, having studied international relations. So in 1991, as I embarked on this journey, women were not allowed to serve on combat ships. Women were not allowed to fly combat aircraft. And so since I had no idea what the Navy did, that was just fine with me. Except over that period of time while I was a midshipman at George Washington University, the combat exclusion law was repealed. And so when I graduated from the program, they told me, would you like to be a surface warfare officer, an aviator, or a supply officer? And I said, well, okay. And so I ended up being a surface warfare officer. And again, I had never stepped foot on a ship before. And so I had a lot to learn. And of course, as I packed up my seat, but wearing this same uniform with a few less stripes, I finished my initial training, and I got on a plane and I flew to Italy with my sea bag on my back. And I got on a CH-53 loaded full of Marines who took me to the USS Wasp on deployment. And there were about, in our ARG, about 5,000 Marines. There were 2 on our ship. And I was one of 6 ensigns, 6 female ensigns. And now those were all the women that were on the ship at the time. And we were an experiment. And part of the experiment, and I love the videos that we showed at the beginning of this, both from the Navy and the Marine Corps, because I just see so many similarities in my journey. When I arrived on the Wasp, there was this general attitude that, okay, you're here now, but you're on a trial basis. You have to figure out how to fit in here. You have to learn how to do things the way we do them here. And maybe, eventually, we'll take more women. So we felt a tremendous sense of pressure that we were the test case, and we had to be successful, and we had to show everybody that we could be better, because if it wasn't for us succeeding, then there may not be more women on combat ships or women flying combat aircraft. And so I played that for a while. I really tried. I really tried to do things exactly the same way as the men. I really tried to fit in. But eventually, I realized that I really had to be myself. And the turning point for me came as a mom. So I have been married to a wonderful man for almost 25 years who also served 26 years in the Navy as an E-2 pilot. And when we had our daughter, I realized that going back to sea on a ship with a little baby and a husband who's also in the Navy and accomplishing his professional goals, I really had to do this my way. And by that I mean I couldn't pretend to be somebody else because I just didn't have the energy and the time for that, right? So we managed that. We managed those dual career paths. I learned how to be comfortable being myself. And what does that mean? I learned to be humble. I learned to ask a lot of questions. I had tremendous mentorship. Now, I'd like to talk a little bit about the mentorship that I've gotten all the way through here. Where's my non-coms? Where's my chiefs? My E7, E9? You guys, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the chiefs that I had. As baby Ensign Kuchar got to the Wasp, and my chief put his arm around me, figuratively, and said, all right, we're going to teach you how to do this. My non-commissioned officers were completely committed to my success at every step of my career as a division officer on a ship, which is your first job on a ship. So I was an engineer on an amphibious ship. And then on my second, and I was a fire control officer, which means I worked really hard to make sure all the combat systems equipment was working, all the weapons worked. And then the second time I went to sea as a department head, so I had a few divisions that worked for me, my gunner's mate chief, since I was in charge of weapons, took me aside and was also committed to my success. So not only did I have a captain and an XO who were committed to my success, but also the people that worked for me, who wanted to teach me and train me. And one of them said to me, someday you're going to be the captain of this ship, and I want to make sure you're ready. And those are the people that I really depended on. And then again, when I was selected to be an executive officer, and oh, by the way, the first 10 years of my career, I only served on ships with female officers. There were no female enlisted on those ships as well. And so to my senior female enlisted members, have worked even that much harder. And again, that sense of pressure that I had as an O1 to succeed, because I knew that if we didn't do well, there'd be no female chief petty officers, there'd be no female petty officers, there'd be no female seamen behind us. So they also worked very hard to get to that place where they could also serve on combat ships. So then I've served on a frigate, the Oliver Hazard Perry class. Then I served on a DDG and a cruiser. And my captain, when I was a senior department head, said to me, I want you to be a good captain. I'm going to teach you and train you how to do this. I don't know if you'll be a captain or not, but I want to make sure that you're ready when the time comes. These people were committed to me, not because I was the woman on board, but because they saw something in me that allowed them to want to see me succeed. No one made them do it. And for them, I am eternally grateful for all the people that have supported me. And even now, as a captain, a CO of a ship, and then as a captain, there have been also great people who have taken me aside and said, hey, I want you to be ready for the next level. And frankly, there haven't been any senior women who I've had the privilege to work for that closely, because there just haven't been that many. And so now, with the invention of the internet, since I was a midshipman, we have a Facebook group, which is great, and I say that kind of tongue-in-cheek, but there was not the technological ability for us to connect over great distances that there is today. And so it's very important for us to share best practices, to share opportunities for the young women who are coming up behind us, as well as for the men. I have some great friends in the room who've been captains with me and peers with me and said, hey, I'm the captain of this ship, and I've got some great women who work for me, and I can teach them how to be great naval officers, and I will, but I don't know how to teach them how to be a mom and a wife and be a great naval officer and how to be a woman in the Navy. Can I send them your way? So it really does take a village, because my peers, my male peers, as well as my seniors and subordinates, have also been committed to their success and growth, to pick out talent where you find it and encourage it and allow it to blossom. And so, I've gone through the whole gamut with you of where I've been to where I am today. And so, I look towards the future. I've met some wonderful midshipmen here who are looking forward to graduating and going on to roles as combat aviators, to driving combat ships. And I'm very excited for them. And I hope that they find mentors in the fleet. And then, I just also am inspired by the fact, I thought that in my lifetime I would see women on submarines. I didn't appreciate that it would be in my career, and I think that during my career we're going to see a female captain of a submarine. And so if that doesn't inspire you, that where we've come in a relatively short period of time, one person's career, I think you really should be heartened by that.
We have a little bit of time for a question or two from the audience, if anyone. I'm just going to give you my mic here. I know you feel that way, but it's the hair.
Thank you. I'm Maggie Feldman-Pilch. I run NAPSEC Girl Squad. How I ended up at this table blows my mind. We just did a survey of about 900 members of our community. There are 25,000 of us overall. Some of them are in this room tonight. Almost 80% of them reported that while they acknowledge they are working and living in a system not built by them or for them, and that is in some ways out to get them, whether it wants to be or not. They are finding a way to be successful regardless because they love what they do, they are deeply committed to their work, and they love serving their country. I lose a lot of sleep at night wondering, what about those who didn't make it, who couldn't tough it out? And I worry about the decisions that could have been made or been made differently had there been different people in the room. So I wonder to all four of you, are there particular inflection points where you think this would have gone the other way if the room looked different?
Well, I guess I'll start because, as I intimated, there was a turning point for me, and you're exactly right. There's been a shift, in particular in the military, of hey, you have to fit in, you have to go along to get along, to you belong here, and that's what I hoped to show you on my journey. Serving in the military or serving in the national security sector is really hard. And it may not be for every single person. And so no one who serves a brief period of time and decides, hey, this is maybe not fitting in with my life, I don't see that as a failure at all. I see that as an opportunity for us to all grow from that person's participation and experience and expertise. And I, as I counsel young people in the military, hey, if you're just here for 5 to 10 years, we value you. We value your expertise, your experience. Where you sit at the table is different. Every single person in here has different experience. And I think what we've learned as women joining a predominantly male organization, I think the Navy is, I'll say 80% male about. I think what I bring to the table is, and again, in particular, as a mom, hey, moms in the room know that we're comfortable with chaos. Sometimes things just go crazy, and you know what? That's okay. And lots of young men and women decide that parenthood is inconsistent with the journey that they need to take, and that's okay. But I think we all gain value of new ideas, new expertise, new experiences that we can take with us and think about how to improve the organization. So I would encourage people who may find that this is not a good fit for them to at least be positive and contribute value so the rest of us can take forward that experience.
Well, in the case of diplomacy, it might be a little bit different, but if we look back to maybe 40 years back, 50 years back, there were still very few women in diplomacy. There were even some rules or some laws in several countries that did not allow women to go into diplomacy. And of course, a woman would not be considered to be sent to difficult places. For example, places that were on a civil war or this. And this has changed very fast. And it has changed very fast because to be a diplomat, you have to have a good education. And women have proven themselves in university that more and more we are the best students. So this has opened a lot of possibilities because some of the graduates of the universities have been the best women. So now, for example, in the Mexican Foreign Service, when we have exams, entrance exams, 50% normally, or sometimes 55%, are women. But then the big challenges start, because it's not so difficult to get in, but it's much more difficult to continue a career. Why? Because if you want to have a family, in a way you may not go into a ship, but you are sent to places in which maybe if you're alone, you may feel very lonely. So said, can I hold myself in this place alone without knowing anyone? Or if you have a husband and a family, then you have to ask yourself, is my husband going to follow me? Is he going to be happy there? Can he have a professional life of his own? And for the children is the most difficult challenge, because you have to uproot them every 4 years from one place to another. And you have a lot of family problems there because then they lose their identity sometimes. So a lot of children of diplomats say, where am I from? Am I from Mexico, from the US? Am I from Denmark? I served 8 years in Denmark, and my youngest daughter, in a way, when we left Denmark, she said, but mommy, I feel more comfortable at home in Denmark than in Mexico. And I understood that. So that is a huge challenge. And a lot of women leave the career because of this. I don't know now, even some years ago when I was ambassador to Denmark and Norway, it was the first time that the Navy had women at the Buquescuela Cuauhtémoc, our tall ship, the first time. And now, Admiral, almost 50% are now of the crew. But I am sure that for them, they are encountering some of the challenges that I have. In my personal case, for example, my husband, I said, is a career diplomat, and he's just retired. But for 12 years, we lived apart. I was ambassador to Denmark, and he was ambassador to Finland, and then I was ambassador to Turkey, and he was ambassador to Romania. And we only saw each other on the weekends. Maybe that's why our marriage has lasted for 40 years. I don't know. A successful marriage of 40 years, because they were very romantic weekends. So just try to see always a good part of everything. But I was in Copenhagen. Agustin, my husband, was in Helsinki. Mercedes, my eldest daughter, was in London. My youngest daughter, Martha, was first in Copenhagen and then in Amsterdam. To keep a family together with that, it's very difficult. And this is the kind of challenges that I think we have. And at a certain time, you have to take a decision. Is this the life for me or not? And for me, it has been incredibly important, the support that I have always received from my husband and from my daughters. My daughters, when I was doing all this research on peacekeeping operations in Mexico, and I went to several TV programs to explain why Mexico had to participate in peacekeeping operations, and they were very young children. And one day, one of them told me, Mommy, why can't you be a normal mother? And I said, what do you mean by normal? I say, why don't you bring us to school and then go to have coffee with other moms? Why do you have to go into TV and talk about armies? This is not a normal mother, Mom. So, but now they say, Mommy, thank you for being a role model. And I always instill in them, and I try to instill in all the women that have worked with me at different embassies and different places and here, that nothing can stop a woman. And that there is nothing as a normal woman, but you have to build your own career and your own life. But it's not easy, and it's basically at the end a personal decision on how to go forward.
I really appreciate you asking the question, and candidly, I appreciate the vulnerability on behalf of all the women in the room and asking the question. If I can, because I will not be able to amplify anything more than my co-panelists have said, but I'd just like to make it about the individual for a moment. All of us have gone through phases in our careers, and we may be going through them now, where either structurally or with individual relationships, you're not being treated with dignity and respect, and you're struggling potentially with what your purpose is in showing up to work. All I would offer is it's always an opportunity, one, to remember that those are standards. The standards of respect, dignity, and purpose are standards that every single person, regardless of gender, deserves. And first, don't chase a lower standard. You don't have to emulate the conduct around you, whether it's structural or individual. The second is I find that periods of my life where things are not going as well as I would prefer for them to go actually make me a more empathetic person and make me more open to seeing who around me needs help. And I found the most amazing opportunities during that time to candidly grow relationships, either friendships or mentorship opportunities. And so I would just ask that for those individuals in the room to whom that would be a very deeply personal question and personal experience, given what they're doing right now, is remind yourself that you can only control yourself. You don't have to chase a lower standard. And there's always an opportunity to make sure that you're not exporting behavior you do not tolerate or agree with outside the circle that you're dealing with at any point in time.
I hope that everyone takes from this conversation tonight a sense of hope, because that's what I've gotten here from these panelists and from the senator, is that there's a lot of hills to climb, and there have been a lot of struggles. But I think if anything illustrates the possibility that women have, look at how far women have come, and look at how far they will continue to go. And I also appreciate the vulnerability of your question. I will say, from a personal perspective, I hope my husband's not watching the live stream because he's going to kill me for saying this, but about a year ago, my husband, he was in the Marine Corps, and he was selected for colonel. He was a lieutenant colonel, but it would have mean him leaving. And leaving, we have 2 young kids, twin boys, and I'd know chaos, believe me. And he chose to retire out of the Marine Corps instead of take the promotion because he didn't want me to uproot me. He didn't want to uproot our twins, our boys, and my career was doing well. Look what's happened since then, but just kidding. My career was doing well. He wanted to support me. So I think there has been so much change. 10, 15, 20 years ago, a husband on his way to be a colonel in the Marine Corps, retiring for his wife's career. Can you imagine that happening? But now no one batted an eye at it. So we have really come so far, and I'm so optimistic, especially seeing these bright faces in here and hearing these wonderful inspirational stories, that we are only getting better, and we'll only be, we only have new hills to climb and new things to win. So anyway, I cannot thank the panelists enough here for their stories and sharing their personal stories tonight. And to everyone here, thank you. Sky.
Thank you so much. Ladies, we just truly appreciate your time. I personally the vulnerability that you shared of your trials and of your triumphs just speaks volumes to me, and I know to everyone else who's in this room as well. Thank you so much. Secretary Moodley will now come and present our panelists with a small memento to commemorate their participation in tonight's panel.
There's not much I can say after that, but I just really, other than to extend my gratitude for, not just for the insight, but the vulnerability and just the openness to discuss these issues here. And it's just a wonderful evening, and it could have gone on for another hour just to hear some of these stories. But just neat to see just the various experiences, some of the commonalities, some of the differences, the approaches, and I think we all learned a lot. And Jody, start working on next year's program, okay? All right. Thanks, everybody. Thank you very much. Yeah. Yes. Oh, yes. Yeah, let me say something about Anne, because I've traveled around the world with Anne, and she has a young family as well, and she's a tremendous, tremendous talent and does just a great job for us. And so I just want to recognize that. Thank you, Anne. So, thank you. Okay, thanks, everybody.
Thank you, sir. And thank you so much, ladies. Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes the events for this evening. However, you've got some dessert right in front of you, some delicious coffee, probably a little bit more wine. So please continue to enjoy this time together, the camaraderie that we can share. And take your time lingering here and enjoying this before you depart, and depart at your leisure. Thank you all so much for attending. We definitely look forward to celebrating with you at next year's International Women's Day celebration.